You had mentioned in your story, I read your story, that you felt better walking on the beach than you did lying in your own bed.
Absolutely.
I, I,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I point that out because a lot of people, what you just said, which is, if you go away and you feel better, or if you're feeling bad, maybe even attempt to go away from your home. What we have seen since COVID, what I have, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this. During COVID, all the hotels were shut down and nobody was running the HVAC systems were not in operation in order to save money. And so a lot of these buildings became water damaged through moisture vapor, and many of them now are contaminated with mold. And so we've seen this where people try to get out of their houses and they end up going from one source of mold to another source of mold, and then
Yeah.
they don't get better, and then they
Hmm.
get, obviously get frustrated. But you were on the beach, like outside in the fresh air, versus maybe staying put and watching TV in a moldy hotel room, right?
Yeah. Yeah. At I lived near the beach at the time, and that was a natural thing. I would walk the dog on the beach, and it would surprise me that I could go from being completely wiped out to being able to go out there and walk and enjoy myself. And the hotel situation is tricky. Ideally, people would find an outdoor environment, a camping type situation as their trial to see, if the home is a problem. Because, yes, people can go from one moldy environment to the other. The hotel situation you described sounds like it would be very problematic in places with humid conditions. It might not be as big of an issue, in places where the AC running continually isn't essential. So, hotels are a reasonable option for people usually, but um, you can never guarantee an environment. A different environment is healthy. You do the best you can, and you try not to bring your personal items with you, because then you're physically bringing the problem with you, so you won't learn anything. And even if the other building isn't perfect, there's a good chance that it will not bother you as much as the exact mix that you had been exposed to and been reacting to. So it can still be informational. Ideally, we would all live and spend our time in healthy environments all the time, but we do not have perfection in the indoor and outdoor environment. So we have to kind of work with what can you do to find out. And if I can get people to do that, I don't have to do much in terms of them deciding that they want to live somewhere else, or, so that's the useful part of having that trial away. Because, if it happened to me, but I didn't realize it at the time. But if you actually go from how horrible you're feeling and then, feel a lot better, you don't really want to go back to that life. And, at least it's informative and motivating for people.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of time frame? I know it's probably different for everyone in your experience. It is in mine. What kind of time frame do you generally recommend? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? And do you have people that, even being in a great place that's mold free, still really struggle? Like it's not long enough for them to be out of it?
Yeah. I usually ask for 2 weeks. It can take longer for people who've been heavily exposed for a long time. Usually, something will be noticeable within a few days. Not perfection, but not that same oppressive malaise that you were, potentially feeling in a moldy home. And um, you're looking for some improvement, some change when the person's away. If absolutely nothing happens during that 2 weeks, they feel exactly the same, then it gets trickier to sort out. It doesn't necessarily mean that their house isn't a problem. It's just, it's a different clinical situation. If people start to feel better, then you have a really good clue. And, because in reality, I'll treat anybody regardless of what situation they're in. But it's a real uphill battle if they're still in a moldy environment or an unhealthy environment of any sort, because the treatments, you're just basically trying to counter the effects of the moldy or otherwise unhealthy home.
Yeah, I see the same thing. It's typically if they're in it and they're in it bad, no matter what we try to do, it's like it's fruitless in terms of any kind of real super helpful comeback for their health.
Yeah, that's why if you can really get them to do a trial away, um, it's really useful. Because they experience it for themselves. But again, there's circumstances, financial, family, personality, where not everybody takes that route. I
Yeah,
encourage it, but you have to work with people where they are and who they are.
yeah, for sure, absolutely. I've experienced exactly the same. Um, so we can get out of the mold. We can do a trial if we suspect mold. We can get out of the house for a few weeks, ideally in an open air environment where we can really take advantage of fresh air and Mother Nature's
Mhm.
cleansing power. But um, what would you suggest? So there are a number of different methodologies that have been evolved and developed over the last several years, and so I would ask you kind of a two-part question here. Number one, if we're talking about investigating a person for mold poisoning or mycotoxicosis, what kinds of laboratory technologies have you found in your practice to be very helpful in kind of concretely solidifying or at least building a case for that person that mold is a likely culprit of their illness?
So every lab has a limitation. Every lab has false negative and false positives. I am always the most interested in knowing the clinical history and the environmental history. If they were clearly in a severely water damaged building, that is important. The tests that are more useful for making a link include urine mycotoxin testing, which can absolutely have false negatives, right off out of the gate. But it's urine, so the person has to have been able to get the toxin into the urine for it to be measurable. People who have been exposed for a while are often glutathione depleted, and they have a body burden of mycotoxins, but we can't measure it in the urine because they can't get it that far. Mold antibodies are also interesting to me, and not just IgE, but the IgGs. They have Stachybotrys, IgG, IgA, IgM. Sometimes I see that be positive. Again, antibodies are just going to tell you that you've been exposed at some point, or if it's an IgE, that you have a type 1 allergy. But I used to do, when I had an in-office practice, nasal fungal cultures. The hospital lab where I was really good at letting those grow out. So that gave me, a piece of information for treatment. I will always get complete labs, including detailed thyroid labs. Um, Vitamin D levels are low very frequently. ANAs are positive very frequently, usually at under 1 to 160 titer for just mold exposure. That was one of the things that elevated for me up to 1 to 320 and then is totally normal now. So I will get CBC iron studies because that can be in the mix if somebody's iron stores are low. Nutritional panel, a complete nutritional panel through a specialty lab. I don't know if I can say it, but we all have our choices. That's super useful. Oxidative stress markers, lipid peroxides, 8-deoxyguanosine, very interesting. I used to get C4A and TGF beta 1, and then there was a period where the labs just wouldn't do it. So I've kind of got out of the habit of that. But that was also interesting as a, connection to exposure. And then neurocognitive testing. Again, when I had an in-office practice, I would do Dr. Kate Kilburn's neurotest profile, and that was very interesting too.
So kind of putting all the pieces together, some tests more direct, some a little less direct, but also giving you insight about the overall status of the patient and their inflammatory response and how you might use other tools to help with that along their journey. Fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah. Because you can get people away from the mold, but restoring what was depleted during the time of exposure is essential for them to regain their best health.
Yeah, I always say what caused your illness is maybe not what's always perpetuating it, because the damage that was done to get there can sometimes linger even after the exposure ends.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And working through, getting that corrected is really kind of the key. And, I don't know if you use the Dr. Bill Ray's sort of rain barrel approach, total load approach to exposure, but everything kind of fills the rain barrel and people don't necessarily notice as it's filling until they're overflowing. So, and that could be, toxin, stress, illness, everything kind of, fills it up. And our body is usually correcting that. My goal is to get people low enough from the top of their rain barrel so they can absorb the things that cannot be helped. In reality, we will have exposures that are unavoidable. Something happens. So if you can, get them working better, get glutathione replaced, I use binders. I like activated charcoal if they've had a mycotoxin exposure. And if they have a reserve, then if they have future exposures, they'll still feel it, but it'll be so much easier to recover. So, that's really my goal. You don't expect people to reach perfection and never feel bad again in their lives. That's not how it works. But they're mostly going to feel good. And if something happens, it's easy enough to figure out what to do. That's really my goal.
Yeah, they become resilient enough to handle the day-to-day minutia that we're all exposed to and not just crushed by small things.
Yeah, that's really I will point that out. I don't know if you've seen this too, but to me, it's really important for people to understand that nothing in the human body just gets linearly better. It's always up and down. Yeah. But I'm looking for trending better, not not the ups and downs, because those are unavoidable.
So part two of that question. So I asked you what tools you found helpful for identifying the potential for somebody being in mold. What tools do you recommend? And I know you're not a mold inspector or remediator, but what things do you recommend that they look for or seek out in a mold inspection? What kinds of tests or tools would you say are helpful, and what kinds would you say are potentially misleading?
Great question. First off, the World Health Organization, when they did their extensive review on dampness, looked into testing also. That was in 2009. We were expecting to get an update about 10 years later. I don't think we're going to get one because of COVID and other issues, but they defined damp or moist buildings as known history of water damage or leaking, visible mold, condensation, or musty and moldy smells. So any of those entered a study, into their analysis. They also looked at air samples, and they commented that it would take 27 to 36 air samples to get a feel of a building. So, that being said, a positive air sample that shows elevations in mold spores does indicate that they are there. The problem is that they're not always aerosolizing. That's where, they said that 27 to 36 samples, which nobody's going to do. That would be insanely expensive. But the point is that a negative air test does not reassure you that a building is fine. If somebody sees visible mold, I would recommend a direct sample, like a tape lift or something, directly on the visible mold. ERMI type tests are interesting, and they primarily provide a history of the building because the goal is to collect dust in hidden places. That's kind of the goal of an ERMI. So those types of tests I found the most confusing and potentially misleading. For example, I had a college student age kid who was doing great. He had moved from one environment and was in a different environment and somehow chose to do an ERMI test. And, he's a student, he has books and stuff, and that's not great. I'm sure there was some contamination, but it was in direct contrast to what was happening clinically. So, I also know that what's being picked up on an ERMI is not necessarily what's truly active in the environment that you're breathing. So yes, it would be good to clean behind the cabinets and the refrigerator and all that. And it's not good, to find mold on an ERMI sample, but it also doesn't necessarily represent what's going on in the moment in the building. And so I think those are the three main tests, and they can be useful, especially if an air sample finds something, because it's guaranteed there. But if it misses it, you need to do another 35 samples, according to the World Health Organization, to really be sure it's not there. So there are limitations. Really, though, if people need to prove something is there, the tests are useful. However, I am generally much more interested in people resolving the problem. So identifying the source of the moisture and having it safely remediated under containment. Every water damage item needs to be removed and replaced under containment so it doesn't contaminate the rest of the house. And so if your resources are limited and there's an issue, I'm much more interested in what is physically seen, whether it's by an inspector who can access certain areas or even just, to the naked eye, because if that happened, it's got to be addressed. Life happens, things leak, things go wrong, but just wiping them down is not going to solve anything. And in a way, you're pouring more water on it. So anyway, testing can be useful. I recommend people, when they can see a water damaged area, fix it. And if you're going to test it, test the actual sample, once it's been safely removed, to get an idea. So that's kind of my take on testing.